The sun beat down mercilessly on the dry earth, the heat shimmering in the distance like a cruel mirage. Jake stood at the edge of his fields, his fingers digging into the parched soil. A week ago, this land had been thriving, rows of emerald-green crops stretching towards the horizon, fed by a steady flow of water from the underground well. Now, his plants were shriveling, the leaves curling inward as if retreating from an unseen force. The irrigation system, which had run flawlessly for years, sputtered weakly, delivering nothing but a few reluctant dribbles. A deep sense of unease coiled in his gut. Something was wrong. Jake moved swiftly, checking every inch of his equipment. The well should have been full, the winter rains had been generous and water restrictions had only just been lifted. His filtration system was intact, the pipes unbroken. Yet the water was vanishing as if being swallowed by the earth itself. His boots kicked up dust as he strode toward the well, sweat trailing down the back of his neck. He twisted the valve, expecting resistance. Instead, the wheel spun too easily. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. Someone had tampered with his supply. A flicker of movement at the edge of his property caught his eye. Just beyond the wire fence, where his land met the sprawling estate next door, a newly dug trench cut through the ground. Jake's pulse quickened. That hadn't been there before. He climbed over the fence in a few quick motions, following the unnatural scar in the earth. The trench led directly to the neighboring property, an ostentatious spread of manicured gardens, pristine fountains, and a turquoise swimming pool that gleamed under the afternoon sun. Water. So much water. Enough to sustain an entire farm, his farm, but instead it was being wasted on luxury. A sinking certainty settled in his chest. He already knew who was behind this. Karen. The name itself left a bitter taste in his mouth. She was a part-time resident, living in the city most of the year and only gracing the countryside with her presence when the weather was nice. She owned more land than she used, treating it like an oversized backyard rather than a working property. Where others conserved, she indulged. Where others struggled, she thrived, at the expense of anyone who got in her way. And now she was stealing his water. Jake's hands clenched into fists as he followed the trench to a thick PVC pipe running directly from his supply line into her property. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. He wasted no time marching up to her front door. The stone path felt offensively cool beneath his boots, a stark contrast to the drought-stricken soil on his own land. He pounded on the door, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. It swung open a moment later, revealing Karen in a flowing sundress, sunglasses perched on her head, a cocktail lazily balanced in her manicured fingers. Behind her, the sound of laughter and splashing water filled the air, guests lounging by the pool, oblivious to the theft that had made their leisure possible. "Jake," she said smoothly as if they were old friends catching up. "What brings you over?" He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You know exactly why I'm here," he said, his voice like gravel. "You stole my water." Karen let out a short, incredulous laugh, taking a slow sip of her drink. "Oh please. You can't steal something that doesn't belong to you." "It does belong to me. I pay for that well. That supply is for my farm, my crops. You had no right to tap into it." She waved a dismissive hand. "Jake, let's be reasonable. It's just water. You have acres of land, you can't possibly need all of it. And besides," she gestured vaguely toward her estate, "I have a lot of guests. It's been so hot lately. I couldn't just let them suffer, could I?" His jaw tightened. Suffer asterisk? He thought of his withering crops, the dying livestock, the families depending on his produce. "You're draining my supply to fill your pool and run your fountains while my farm is dying." Karen sighed as if he were the one being difficult. "You're being dramatic. It's not like you're going bankrupt over a little water." He took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Turn it off. Now." For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Annoyance, maybe even a touch of fear, but it was quickly masked by that infuriating smirk. "Oh, Jake," she cooed, "do you really want to make a big deal out of this? I have friends on the council, you know. People who make decisions about these things." There it was. The unspoken threat. She had connections, power, influence, and she was betting he didn't. Jake exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help. "I don't care who you know. This isn't over." Karen's smirk widened. "Oh honey. It already is." The door clicked shut in his face. He stood there for a long moment, fists trembling at his sides. He could hear the party continuing, the sound of water splashing mockingly in the background. Fine. If she wanted a fight, he'd give her one. But he wouldn't win it by playing fair. The days passed and the water crisis on Jake's farm only worsened. The soil was turning to dust beneath his boots, brittle stalks crumbling at the lightest touch. His livestock grew restless, their troughs never quite full enough. He did what he could, rationing what little he had left, but it was a losing battle. Every time he turned on the irrigation, the pressure was weaker than before. Meanwhile, next door, Karen's estate remained a lush oasis, her sprinklers running at full blast in the early mornings, her fountains gushing endlessly, her pool shimmering under the hot sun. Jake's frustration simmered into something darker. He had always played by the rules, worked hard, minded his own business. He never caused trouble. But Karen had crossed a line. He tried reporting the theft, lodging a formal complaint with the local water authority. A man in a stiff collared shirt took notes, nodding sympathetically, promising an investigation. But nothing happened. Karen, as she so smugly reminded him, had friends in high places. Then came the final straw. It was just after dawn when Jake drove into town for supplies. When he returned, he found a small group of his farmhands gathered near the well, talking in hushed, agitated voices. The second they saw him, they fell silent, shifting uncomfortably. Jake's stomach tightened. "What is it?" One of the men, Luis, hesitated before answering. "Karen's workers were here this morning. They dug deeper into the line." Jake stared at him, uncomprehending. "What do you mean deeper?" Luis pointed toward the far end of the property. "They must have come before sunrise. Looks like they ran more piping. Your water pressure's gonna drop even lower." Jake turned on his heel and sprinted toward the well. Dust kicked up behind him as he ran, lungs burning, heart pounding with rage. When he reached the trench, his worst fears were confirmed. The original pipe running to Karen's property had been widened, the connection reinforced. Not only was she stealing his water, she was doubling down, taking even more. The fury that erupted inside him was white-hot. Karen wasn't just entitled. She wasn't just selfish. She was brazen. She was so confident in her untouchability that she had escalated the theft right under his nose. He could already hear her excuses, her dismissive tone. "Oh, Jake, it's just a little water. Oh, Jake, I have guess. Oh, Jake, you'll be fine. Asterisk." But he wasn't fine. His crops were dying. His workers were struggling. His entire livelihood was on the verge of collapse, all so Karen could keep her precious fountains running. Jake stormed back toward the house, mind whirling, heart hammering against his ribs. Confronting her again would be pointless. She would smile, deflect, maybe even threaten him with legal action. No, direct confrontation wasn't the answer. He needed something better. Jake wasn't a fool. He knew that Karen's arrogance was both her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. She believed herself invincible, insulated by wealth and connections. She thought the rules didn't apply to her. But Jake had something she didn't. He had patience. And he knew the land better than she ever could. He spent the next few days watching, observing. He noted the times her irrigation system ran, the hours her pool was refilled, the exact moments her fountains switched on and off. He studied the pipeline she had so carelessly installed, following its path, mapping out every detail in his head. And then he saw it, the weak spot. Karen's stolen water system wasn't perfect. She had cut corners, using cheaper piping for part of the trench, likely assuming no one would dare tamper with it. That section of the pipe was buried shallower than the rest, vulnerable to interference. One good disruption and her whole system would come crashing down. But Jake wasn't just going to cut her off. He was going to make sure she felt it. With careful planning, he set the trap. He kept his movements discreet, working only at night, ensuring there were no witnesses. He adjusted the pressure in his own system, subtly redirecting flow to make Karen's pipes dependent on a single, fragile connection. It was a slow, methodical process, one that required patience and precision. And then, finally, it was ready. The perfect moment came on a scorching Saturday afternoon. Karen was hosting one of her extravagant pool parties, the kind where music blared through the valley and cars clogged the country roads. Dozens of guests milled about her estate, sipping cocktails, laughing, their carefree existence funded by stolen water. Jake waited until the party was in full swing before making his move. With one swift, deliberate motion, he severed the weak section of Karen's pipeline. At first, nothing happened. The estate continued as if nothing had changed. Then, slowly, the consequences began to unfold. The first sign of trouble was the sudden silence of the fountains. The once impressive displays sputtered before trickling into nothingness. The sprinklers died next, leaving patches of thirsty grass exposed to the unforgiving sun. Then came the real chaos, the pool. With her connection to Jake's well severed, the automatic refill system failed. The water level began to drop, inch by inch as guests waited in confusion. The once pristine turquoise shimmer dulled, turning cloudy without the constant influx of fresh water. Then the screaming started. Karen emerged from her house in a fury, shrieking at her staff, at the maintenance workers, at anyone who would listen. The party came to a grinding halt as guests whispered, as phones were pulled out to record. Jake watched from a distance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. This was only the beginning. He wasn't just going to stop Karen. He was going to make her pay. Karen's rage was palpable, her voice carrying across the valley as she barked orders at her staff. Guests exchanged awkward glances, some quietly slipping out, realizing the party was over. The once luxurious estate, always immaculate, now looked like a stage set for disaster. The dry fountains stood as silent sentinels of Karen's downfall, and the pool, without its endless supply of stolen water, was already beginning to resemble a stagnant pond. Jake watched from his porch, sipping from a cold glass of lemonade. He had expected her to call for a plumber, maybe even a private contractor, but he knew that no matter who she brought in, they wouldn't be able to fix the problem quickly. He had made sure of that. The pipe he'd severed wasn't just any section, it was the linchpin that held her entire stolen water system together. Any attempt to repair it without completely reinstalling the entire setup would be futile. As predicted, it wasn't long before Karen stormed onto his property. She was still wearing her designer swimsuit cover-up, her hair disheveled from the stress of her party unraveling. Her expensive sandals kicked up dust as she marched toward him, fury written across her face. "You," she spat, stabbing a manicured finger toward him. "You did this." Jake barely glanced up. "Did what?" "Don't play dumb," she seethed, stepping closer. "My water, my entire system is down. The fountains, the sprinklers, my pool, all of it. You think I don't know you had something to do with this?" He took another slow sip, letting the silence stretch between them. Then, setting his glass down, he met her gaze with a calm, unwavering stare. "Sounds like a you problem, Karen." Her nostrils flared, her face darkening. "Don't you dare act like you had nothing to do with this. My workers found the cut pipe. Someone tampered with it." "Funny," Jake mused, leaning back in his chair. "Because I remember you tampering with my water first." Karen's mouth opened, then shut. For a moment, she seemed to be searching for an excuse, some justification for her actions. But she had none. She had taken something that didn't belong to her, believing she'd never face consequences. And now, for the first time, she was on the losing end. "You don't understand," she said, shifting tactics, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "This estate, my lifestyle, it needs water. My guests expect a certain level of luxury. If word gets out that my property is dry, it could ruin my reputation." Jake let out a humorless chuckle. "So, let me get this straight. You're worried about your reputation while my farm is dying? While my animals are going thirsty?" Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a little water." Those words ignited something sharp inside him. He stood abruptly, stepping forward, closing the space between them. "A little water?" His voice was low, controlled, but filled with unmistakable anger. "That little water is the difference between my crops surviving and failing. That little water keeps my workers employed, puts food on tables, keeps this farm alive." Karen took an instinctive step back. He had never raised his voice at her before, never confronted her like this. He saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but it was quickly masked by defiance. "Fine," she snapped. "If you want to be this petty, then I'll handle it my way." She pulled out her phone with a dramatic flourish. "I'll call the water authority, the county. Hell, I'll even call my lawyer. We'll see how you like being investigated for vandalizing my property." Jake didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone, calmly tapping through his files before turning the screen toward her. Karen's breath hitched. Displayed before her were photos, high-definition images of the illegal pipeline her workers had installed. Close-ups of the trenches dug across property lines. Time-stamped videos of her water theft in action, showing exactly how she had siphoned his supply. A neatly compiled folder of evidence that made it impossible to deny the truth. "You want to call the authorities?" Jake asked, his voice cool. "Go right ahead. I'd love to hear you explain to the county why you illegally rerouted a private water source onto your land. How much do you think those fines will cost? 10,000? Maybe more? Or do you think the town will just love knowing how you drained a working farm so you could keep your pool full?" Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time she looked truly trapped, like an animal caught in a snare of its own making. "You're bluffing," she whispered, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her doubt.
Am I?
Jake said, slipping his phone back into his pocket.
Maybe. Maybe not.
"But are you willing to take that risk?" The silence stretched thick between them. Karen's hands curled into fists, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. She was used to getting her way, used to manipulating, bribing, or charming her way out of problems. But this time she had no leverage. "You have two options," Jake continued. "One, you pack up your little pipeline, shut it down, and never steal from me again. Or two, I go public with everything I have, and you'll be paying fines for the next decade." Her jaw tightened, her teeth grinding audibly. "You wouldn't?"
Try me.
A tense beat passed. Then another. Finally, with a sharp exhale, Karen turned on her heel. "This isn't over," she hissed over her shoulder. Jake smirked. "Oh, I think it is." She stalked back toward her estate, her retreating figure stiff with barely contained fury. He watched as she disappeared through the gates, the weight of victory settling over him like a long-awaited rainstorm. The battle wasn't just about water. It was about respect. And Karen had finally learned what it felt like to lose. Karen might have stormed off, but Jake knew better than to assume she'd accept defeat so easily. People like her didn't simply back down. They schemed. They plotted. They struck when you least expected it. So he waited. Days passed, then a week. Karen's estate remained eerily quiet. No sprinklers whirred in the morning, no fountains gushed extravagantly, and her once vibrant gardens began to wilt under the relentless sun. Rumors spread through town, whispers of the great drought at Karen's mansion, of an entitled woman brought to her knees. Some even joked that she might have to buy water like everyone else. But Jake knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The confirmation came late one evening. He was returning from the barn when he saw a shadow move near the edge of his property. His instincts flared. Something wasn't right. Keeping his steps light, he crept closer, staying hidden in the dark. The unmistakable hum of machinery filled the night air, followed by the low murmur of voices. Jake crouched near the tree line, his fists tightening. Karen's workers. And they weren't just snooping. They were digging. His heart pounded, anger flaring hot in his chest. He had warned her. Given her a chance to walk away. And now she was trying to steal from him again? Quietly he slipped back toward the house, grabbed his phone and made a call. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, headlights cutting through the darkness. Jake led him straight to the trespassers. Karen's workers barely had time to react before they found themselves caught, tools in hand, knee-deep in stolen soil, standing right over the pipeline. "What do we have here?" the sheriff asked, stepping out of his truck, his flashlight sweeping over the scene. The workers stammered, scrambling for excuses. One tried to claim they were fixing a leak. Another said they were just following orders. But it didn't matter. They were on his land, tampering with his water. Within minutes, they were being escorted off the property. But Jake wasn't done yet. He turned to the sheriff. "This doesn't stop with them. We both know who sent them." The sheriff sighed, rubbing his temple. "You got proof it was Karen?" Jake pulled out his phone. The time-stamped footage spoke for itself, grainy, but clear enough to show Karen's workers sneaking onto his land, tools in hand. The sheriff exhaled heavily. "Yeah," he muttered. "That'll do it." An hour later, Karen's mansion was flooded with red and blue lights. Jake stood at the edge of his property, watching as the officers knocked on her grand double doors. For a moment there was no response. Then finally the doors swung open, revealing Karen in a silk robe, her expression the perfect blend of indignation and forced innocence. "Officers?" she said, feigning surprise. "What's the meaning of this?" The sheriff didn't play games. "We caught your men trespassing on Jake's property, tampering with a water line." Karen's eyes flickered with something, fear maybe, but she recovered fast. Tampering asterisk? That's ridiculous. If anything, they were fixing a problem, probably one Jake caused. The sheriff's face remained impassive. "We have footage, Karen," she faltered. Jake crossed his arms, watching the cracks form in her carefully curated facade. He could see it now, the wheels turning in her mind, the desperation setting in. She had always operated under the assumption that money and influence could shield her. But this was different. This was a crime. "Here's how this is gonna go," the sheriff continued. "Your men are facing charges for trespassing and vandalism. As for you, that pipeline alone is enough to hit you with some serious fines. We're talking thousands, Karen. And if we decide to push for a full investigation? Who knows what else we might find? Karen's confidence shattered. Wait, she stepped forward, her voice dropping into something desperate, almost pleading. Let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can resolve this. Maybe a donation to the department? Or a private arrangement. Jake scoffed. Still trying to buy your way out? Her eyes snapped to him, sharp with barely contained rage. But she was out of options and she knew it. Here's my offer, Jake said, stepping closer. You shut down that entire stolen system permanently. You pay every fine, and you don't set foot anywhere near my water again. Do that and maybe I won't push for a full-blown legal investigation. Ignore me and I'll make sure everyone in town knows exactly what you've been up to. The businesses you frequent, the country clubs you love so much. Hell, I bet the media would love to hear about the entitled socialite draining a farmer's land dry. Karen blanched. She knew he wasn't bluffing. She had spent her life building an image, a reputation. If this got out, if her crime got out, she wouldn't just lose money. She'd lose everything. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to fight. But she couldn't. Fine, she spat, her voice tight with barely contained fury. I'll shut it down. Jake smirked. Good choice. By the next morning, Karen's stolen pipeline was being dismantled piece by piece. The once lush paradise she had built began to wither, the reality of her theft finally catching up to her. Without stolen water, her estate could no longer sustain its extravagant excess. The fountains remained dry, the pools stayed murky, and the gardens, once so vibrant, turned to brittle ruins under the relentless sun. Word spread fast. People in town started talking. Clients withdrew from her business ventures. Invitations to exclusive events disappeared. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was ruined. Jake, meanwhile, got his water back. His farm flourished once more, his livestock healthy, his crops saved. But the real victory wasn't just reclaiming what was his. It was knowing that, for once, someone like Karen had finally faced consequences. And as he stood on his porch, watching the sunset over his thriving land, he couldn't help but smile. Karma, after all, had a way of delivering justice.